The sound of his voice filled the room before I even understood what I had done wrong. It wasn't shouting, not exactly. It was sharper than that. Controlled. Tight. The kind of anger that didn't need to be loud to be frightening. I remember standing still, my hands at my sides, eyes fixed on the floor, trying to make myself smaller without moving at all. The house felt different in those moments, the air heavier, every sound clearer, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the faint hum from the kitchen, my own breathing, slow and careful, like I was afraid even that might make things worse. I didn't cry, I knew better than that. Crying only made things last longer. So I swallowed whatever was rising in my throat and waited. That's what I had learned to do. Wait for it to pass. Wait for permission to speak. Wait for the room to feel normal again. This wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. It was just another reminder of how things worked in our house. Rules were not discussed, they were followed. Questions were not encouraged. Silence was safer. Even then, as a child, I understood something without having words for it. This wasn't about the small mistake that brought us here. It was about control, about order, about making sure I remembered my place. I remember thinking that if I could just be good enough, quiet enough, careful enough, these moments would stop. I believed that obedience was the price of peace, and I was willing to pay it. What I didn't know was how much that quiet would cost me later. Our home sat on a quiet American street, the kind where lawns were trimmed on weekends and neighbors waved but didn't linger. From the outside, it looked ordinary, safe, respectable. Nothing about it suggested tension or fear. That was something you only felt once you stepped inside. Inside, everything had its place. Shoes lined up neatly by the door, voices kept low, doors closed gently, never slammed. There were rules for how we sat at the table, how we spoke to adults, how we moved through the house. Some rules were spoken, most were not. I learned early how to read the room. The sound of his footsteps told me what kind of evening it would be. Slow and heavy meant caution. Quick and sharp meant silence. I listened for keys at the door, for chairs moving, for the way drawers were opened or closed. Those sounds guided my behavior more than any words ever did. Time moved differently when you were waiting. Waiting to be called, waiting for a look, waiting for approval or correction. I spent a lot of my childhood waiting. At school, teachers described me as well-behaved, polite, quiet. I never caused trouble. I followed instructions exactly as they were given. I didn't raise my hand unless I was sure I was right. Being wrong felt dangerous, even there. At home, the same rules applied, only stricter. Meals were quiet affairs. Conversation was allowed, but carefully. I watched what I said. I watched how I said it. I watched his face more than my plate. Fear wasn't loud in our house. It didn't shout or slam doors. It lived in pauses, in long looks, in the way my stomach tightened when I heard my name spoken in a certain tone. I didn't think of it as fear back then. It was just normal. This was how families worked, as far as I knew. Parents set rules, children followed them. Love was shown through discipline, not words. There were no hugs after mistakes, no long talks about feelings. There were expectations and there were consequences. That was enough. I learned how to disappear without leaving the room, how to sit still for long stretches of time, how to make myself invisible when needed. Silence became a skill. Obedience became a habit. Even moments that should have felt light carried weight. Laughter stopped quickly if it got too loud. Play ended the moment it felt out of control. Everything had limits, and crossing them, even by accident, felt risky. Looking back, I can see how much energy it took to live like that. But as a child, you don't question the air you breathe. You adapt, you survive, you learn. I learned how to listen more than speak, how to sense moods, how to adjust myself to fit whatever space I was in. Those lessons stayed with me far longer than I ever expected, and they all led to one moment, a moment that didn't look dramatic from the outside, a moment that didn't leave marks or raise voices, but it changed something inside me that never fully came back. It happened on an ordinary evening. That's what makes it stay with me even now. There was nothing special about the day, no guests, no celebration, just the quiet routine of home, moving from one hour to the next. I don't remember exactly what I did wrong. That part has faded with time. It might have been something small, a forgotten chore, a tone in my voice that didn't sound respectful enough. Maybe I hesitated when I should have answered right away. In our house, small things carried weight. What I do remember is the moment his mood changed. There was a pause before he spoke, a silence that stretched just long enough for me to notice it. I looked up and saw it in his face. Not rage, not shouting, something colder than that. Disappointment mixed with control. He told me to stand still and listen. His voice was firm, measured, every word placed carefully like he wanted it to land exactly where it would hurt the most without ever touching me. He spoke about respect, about rules, about how children were supposed to behave, about how mistakes were choices, not accidents. I nodded because that was expected. I kept my eyes down because looking at him felt wrong in moments like that. My heart was beating faster than usual, but I didn't let it show. I had learned how to hide that part. As he spoke, something inside me began to shift. I could feel it, even then. Not fear exactly, something heavier, like a door closing quietly. I wasn't confused about the rule. I understood the expectation. What confused me was the distance, the way his words felt final, not corrective, like this wasn't about helping me learn, but about reminding me who had the power. I remember thinking very clearly that it didn't matter what I felt. That part of me didn't count. What mattered was obedience, quiet, stillness. When he finished speaking, there was no question asking if I understood. There was no space for response. The lesson was complete. I was dismissed with a look that told me the conversation was over. I walked away slowly, careful not to rush. Every step felt measured. The house felt larger somehow, emptier. Sounds echoed differently after that. The walls felt farther apart. I sat alone for a long time afterward. I don't remember what I was supposed to be doing, homework maybe, or getting ready for bed. I just remember sitting there, staring at nothing, replaying his words in my head. Not because I wanted to understand them better, because I was trying to figure out where I fit inside them. That was the moment something changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough to matter. Before that night, I still believed that being good would bring warmth, that following rules would lead to approval, that effort would be seen. After that night, I stopped expecting that. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel rebellious. I felt smaller, quieter, like the safest thing I could do was reduce myself to whatever was required. I stopped explaining. I stopped asking. I stopped hoping that someone might notice what was happening inside me. From then on, I focused on getting things right. Not emotionally right, just correct. I followed instructions exactly. I anticipated expectations before they were spoken. I tried to leave no room for disappointment. The strange thing is, it worked, at least on the surface. I became the kind of child adults praised, well-mannered, mature for his age, so easy to manage. Those words were said with smiles, and I accepted them quietly. Inside, something else was happening. I began to disconnect from my own reactions. If I felt hurt, I pushed it aside. If I felt confused, I told myself it didn't matter. Feelings became distractions. Silence became safety. That one moment didn't feel like punishment at the time. It felt like a lesson, a line being drawn. And I learned it well. too well. I learned that love didn't show itself when rules were broken. I learned that understanding wasn't guaranteed. I learned that being quiet was better than being honest. That lesson followed me long after the house grew quieter for different reasons. It followed me into classrooms, into friendships, into adulthood. And I didn't realize how deeply it had settled until years later, when the silence it created became harder to live with than the rules ever were. After that night, the house didn't change. The routines stayed the same. Meals were eaten at the same time, doors opened and closed the way they always had. The television played softly in the evenings. On the outside, nothing looked different. Inside me, everything was quieter. I didn't withdraw all at once. It happened slowly, in small ways that were easy to miss. I spoke less at the dinner table. When questions were asked, I answered briefly. I stopped offering details. I learned to give just enough, never more. Silence became a habit before it became a feeling. I started to listen more than I spoke, not because I was curious, but because listening felt safer. When you listen, you can't say the wrong thing. When you listen, you don't reveal anything that can be corrected or misunderstood. Listening gave me control in a house where control didn't belong to me. I watched moods carefully. I learned the sound of footsteps. I could tell how the evening would go just by the way the front door closed. If it shut softly, the air felt lighter. If it shut hard, everything inside me tightened. I adjusted myself accordingly. I kept my room neat, not perfectly neat, just careful enough. I double-checked my work before handing it in. I followed instructions exactly as they were given. I became good at noticing what adults wanted before they had to say it out loud. People thought this meant I was responsible, mature, well-behaved. What it really meant was that I was always alert. Trust changed shape during those years. It didn't disappear, but it became cautious. I trusted rules more than people. Rules were predictable. Rules didn't change their tone without warning. Rules didn't look at you with disappointment when you failed to meet an expectation you didn't know existed. With people, I stayed guarded. I stopped sharing thoughts that didn't feel finished. I stopped asking questions that might sound challenging. I avoided anything that could be read as hesitation or doubt. I learned how to keep my inner world private, even from myself. There were moments when I wanted to speak, when something felt unfair or confusing, when I didn't understand why things had to be the way they were. Those moments came and went quietly. I felt them rise, and then I pressed them back down. I told myself that being quiet was respectful, that keeping thoughts to myself was maturity, that obedience was the same as understanding. Over time, I forgot the difference. The emotional distance wasn't dramatic. There were no arguments, no slammed doors, no obvious tension. That's what made it hard to explain later. From the outside, everything looked fine. From the inside, it felt like living behind glass. I was present but slightly removed. I smiled when expected. I laughed when others laughed. I did what I was told and did it well. But I didn't lean in. I didn't open up. I didn't risk being seen too clearly. Even comfort felt unfamiliar. When kindness appeared, I accepted it politely but didn't settle into it. Part of me was always waiting for the correction that might follow, waiting for the moment that warmth would be replaced by instruction. So I stayed careful. As I grew older, that carefulness followed me. In school, teachers liked me because I didn't cause trouble. I did my work and stayed out of the way. Friends described me as calm, steady, easy to be around. They didn't see how much energy it took to stay that way. I rarely spoke about how I felt, not because I didn't feel anything, but because I didn't trust that those feelings belonged anywhere outside of me. Emotions became something to manage quietly, not something to share. Even joy was measured. I didn't celebrate too loudly. I didn't show excitement too freely. I learned to keep even good feelings contained, just in case. The silence deepened in subtle ways. I avoided conflict, even healthy disagreement. I agreed quickly. I apologized often. I tried to smooth things over before they became uncomfortable. Inside, I was tired. There were nights when I lay awake listening to the house settle, the hum of appliances, the distant sound of traffic, the quiet creaks that came with age. Those sounds felt familiar, almost comforting. They asked nothing of me. In those quiet moments, I wondered who I might have been if I hadn't learned to shrink so early. The thought didn't scare me, just felt distant, like something that belonged to another version of life. I didn't blame anyone. I didn't feel angry. Anger requires space, and I hadn't learned how to take up space. What I felt was a steady, low-level caution that never quite went away. Obedience had become second nature. Distance had become normal. Silence had become language. By the time I reached adulthood, I didn't even notice it anymore. This was just how I moved through the world, careful, quiet, always scanning. It wasn't until much later, when the noise of life grew louder in other ways, that I began to realize how much that silence had shaped me, and how hard it would be to unlearn. It took me a long time to understand what those years had given me, and what they had quietly taken away. For a while, I only saw the surface results. I was dependable. I followed rules. I worked hard. I didn't cause trouble. In many ways, those traits helped me move through life without much friction. But underneath that, there was something missing. As an adult, I noticed how difficult it was for me to speak when something mattered. Not in arguments, not in conflict, but in simple moments that required honesty. Saying how I felt, saying what I needed, saying no without guilt. Those things didn't come naturally. I realized I had learned discipline very well. What I hadn't learned was how to trust my own voice. Looking back now, I can see why my father acted the way he did. He believed structure created safety. He believed firmness prepared children for a hard world. He believed that obedience was the foundation of character. In his own way, he was trying to do what he thought was right. And in many ways, it worked. I became capable. I became responsible. I learned how to endure discomfort without complaint. Those lessons stayed with me, and I don't deny their value. But I also learned to stay silent when connection was needed. I learned to hide confusion instead of asking for clarity. I learned to measure myself constantly against expectations instead of understanding my own limits. What discipline taught me was control. What it quietly took away was openness. That realization didn't come with anger. It came with a kind of sadness that was gentle and honest, not about the past itself, but about the parts of myself that stayed locked away for so long. Over time, I've had to relearn things that others seemed to know naturally: how to speak without rehearsing, how to disagree without fear, how to accept warmth without waiting for correction. Those lessons have taken patience. The silence didn't disappear overnight. It still shows up sometimes, in meetings, in relationships, in moments where vulnerability feels risky. But now, at least, I recognize it for what it is. Not a flaw, not a weakness, just a habit formed in a different time. Understanding that has brought a quiet kind of peace. If you're listening to this and parts of it feel familiar, you're not alone. Many of us grew up in homes where rules were clear, but emotions were less welcome, where obedience was praised and questions were discouraged, where doing the right thing mattered more than feeling understood. There's no blame in that recognition, only awareness. And awareness gives us a choice to keep what strengthened us, and a choice to gently let go of what no longer serves us. If this story stirred something in you, take a moment with it. Think about the rules that shaped your childhood, the lessons you carried forward, the parts of yourself that stayed quiet for a long time. You don't have to explain them. You don't have to justify them. Just noticing is enough. And if you feel comfortable, you're welcome to share a memory or reflection of your own in the comments. Many people listening will understand more than you might expect. Sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that connect us most.